Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan, and I'm absolutely delighted to have with me Desiree Kane today. Desiree, you and I first met through Dave Troy and Jim Stewartson doing a TEDx Mid Atlantic effort dismantling QAnon, where you talked about your experiences at Standing Rock. But over the months, we've gotten to know each other, and I've been helping each other. You've been teaching me more of what I need to know about Indigenous people and First Nations people. And there's been a lot of media lately about residential boarding schools and how Catholic and Protestants set up these schools, abducted Native children, and basically attempted to brainwash them to become good little Christians and identify with them and rob them from their culture. I think it's been described as cultural genocide. So I'm very grateful for you to take some time to help explain to the public what they need to understand and know about this horrible phenomenon. So I'll turn it to you.
Well, thank you. Mi Joxis, Kani Oyashat Desiree Kane, Kani Lukum, Ione, California. So, hello, my name is Desiree Kane. I'm a Miwok Two Spirit, and my community and family is out of Ione, California. I'm a tribally affiliated individual. And honestly, Steve, you said I've been teaching you, but I think it's more accurately stated we're learning from one another quite a bit. You teach me a lot often, so thank you for saying that.
My honor, and it's a learning moment in human history where we're really facing these monumental forces of authoritarianism that are trying to undermine human rights and the dignity of people. So, you had a mind control experience yourself that you shared with me. I don't want to focus this particular video on that, but you've experienced what it's like me and the Moonies, like losing yourself and being disoriented and being programmed. And so this is a journey to help explain to the public what is undue influence, what is mind control and brainwashing. And I've, of course, done a bite model of authoritarian control and my influence continuum. But I'm going to give it back to you. But first, let me just say that you recently shared that your grandfather had been abducted, put in a boarding school, and that there is going to be a U.S. investigation into that school itself. But pick it up and share, please.
Sure. There's a bit of a domino moment that's happening right now because there were a number of mass graves that were identified, and the Indigenous children that were in unmarked graves, numbering, I think it's almost to 1,000 now, in Canada, sparked a probe out of Deb Holland's office to what we already know, which is that the boarding and residential schools, regardless of if they're on the Canada side or the US side, those schools were used to steal children, kill the Indian, save the man, was the modus operandi. And my grandfather, I have the documents from the school district where they're like, here's the Indian kids, here's the schools they're going to be assigned to. And I also have this manuscript that my grandpa bequeathed to me upon his passing, of his experiences at Stewart Indian School in Carson City, Nevada. So what you're referencing is the report out of Holland's office, which those of us with personal ties to the area already knew. There are upwards of 200 unidentified children buried there. I had always understood that it was around 100 or maybe more from my grandpa, but the numbers are actually double what the oral history has passed down to me. So I think he's Washoe. There's a young man right now who's doing a lot of visibility around Stewart Indian School, also known as Carson Indian School, and the child labor that built it. As well as some of the more horrible stories about children choosing to flee in the winter versus staying and being beaten. the sad parts and some of the stories that have surfaced are consistent with my family stories from my grandpa. And so even though it's a very painful dominoing effect of visibility around authoritarian control of Indigenous people, no longer being gaslit and saying like, oh, you should be happy you're American, you have voting rights and things, like it has this undertone of like, oh, it was all worth it, when looking at literal genocide and dead babies in fields. Like, this is what we're talking about, is fields of passed away relatives of tribal members. So it's important, it's needed, and for the overall healing and health and wellness across communities, having this visibility into something and naming it is opening up the tiniest little path for any form of reconciliation, if the possibility of reconciliation. How do you reconcile that? I don't know, but I know that talking openly and owning it is a big part of it. So.
Yeah, I have a colleague and dear friend, Mishi Lesser, who actually did a documentary called Dawnland about this abduction and genocide and programming, and she's a big advocate for reformative justice types of approaches to name the problem, name the abuse, and bring people together, even ancestors of those who did the abuse, to form a future where there's respect and understanding. Certainly what we don't want is minimizing the pain or trauma that was endured. It's terrible. So what else do people need to understand? Because I know that being a white person, I'm Jewish, but I am white, privileged, I really had limited knowledge and experience with Indigenous people, and please talk to them about why they should get involved, why they should embrace the efforts of Indigenous people to reclaim their power and their voice and heal from what's been done to them.
Sure. I'm just going to assume that if people are watching this on your blog, they're familiar with the cult of Trump and combating cult mind control. So when we look at the BITE model of controlling people's behavior, information, all of those things laid out in your influence continuum, what you have identified is extremely applicable when you look at the authoritarian control that has been exerted on this continent since Columbus was found lost at sea by the Taino community in the Caribbean in 1492, thinking he was going somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a cult of white supremacy, there's a cult of authoritarian control, and some of these behaviors have been internalized into the personality of America and Canada in the government. So if people care to undo the cult of Trump in any capacity, if you want to undo white supremacy, if you want to think about what does it mean to end a culture of abuse, really looking at Native people as the canary in a coal mine is a strong approach, because it is so palpable. The BITE model is palpable in our communities and how that has been weaponized upon us. Now, they didn't call it that, but they just went full authoritarian, steal the kids, kill the elders, starve people out, all of those things. That's like, it's on the authoritarian side and then some into genocide.
And they wanted to steal the land and the resources on the land, as well as promote their own religious beliefs, whether it's Catholicism or Protestantism. And, I remember, I don't know how many decades back, where I first heard that blankets with smallpox on it were deliberately being given to Indigenous people in order to murder them, and I was shocked. Mm-hmm. And but as I've gotten older, I'm not shocked anymore with all the horrible things that some individuals have done in the name of God or in the name of country. And we need to start visualizing a future where we can live together in community and in oneness with our planet. You know, global climate crisis is also something that's in our faces, and frankly, people need to get out of this mentality of power and fame and money and accumulation, and start like connecting with real human beings, and adopting the wisdom of our past ancestries.
It's true. I think the thing that I often hear is that Native folks want folks to go back to Europe because so many of the European descendants have been very hurtful. But I personally believe this period in time, I'm a white passing Miwok person. I'm both colonizer and colonized. And the reality of people just going back to Europe or segregating even further isn't actually like, where would I fall in that? And where would most biracial Indigenous people fall in that? We would have nowhere to go. So this just send people away, it isn't, that's a very violent form of like a culture of disposability. And Native people know all about a culture of disposability, which we can actually impart outwards to not practice, right? Like, how about we don't just consume and throw people away? So we must find ways to live together, because there's not going to be a time where we're not all human beings. And Mother Earth, you know, the weather is indiscriminate, right? So Native people, again, canaries in a coal mine, were very in tune with this land. We have practices millennia old to like how to survive this land with these climates. So having that bridge with other humans on this land is actually the caring, like loving approach, like working to survive, right?
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And, you know, Big Pharma wants to sell you pills that they make in a lab, but there's been native herbs used for millennia to help people, you know, get better. And this native wisdom needs to be passed on and exposed for the fact that it helps people to help their own bodies to heal themselves. And I do want to just take a minute, Desiree, if I may, and just say for those who haven't been familiar with combating cult mind control or the cult of Trump, that I got interested in this weird field of brainwashing and mind control and thought reform and undue influence because of my own cult experience in the Moonies. And one of the things that helped me get out of the Moonies was learning about Chinese communist brainwashing techniques used in the 1950s. And we now know that the Chinese are engaged in at least 1 to 3 million Uyghur Muslims, wanting them to become Han Chinese. So it's a very real phenomenon in 2021 that there are systematic social influence processes that can be used on people to break them down, disorient them, and then program them into a new identity. And you were describing my influence continuum from healthy to unhealthy, and the BITE model, which stands for the control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions, all aimed at creating this new pseudo-identity that's in the image of the controller that needs to be dependent and obedient. And so in simplistic terms, there's a formula for being able to say, this is healthy influence, this is unhealthy influence. And clearly what the indigenous population has endured is beyond unhealthy to murder, kidnapping, rape, torture, which is far more than Scientology and the Moonies were doing in the United States. So I do invite people to learn more about my life work of 45 years. But let's come back to you, Desiree. what can people do if they do feel a desire to be an activist? What should they do and what shouldn't they do?
Well, people should decide for themselves. All I can provide are maybe some ideas to choose from. But good, I guess, culturally minded approaches are generally to support the tribe, which have financial oversight, elected leaders. People don't understand that tribal councils are elected bodies that do have reporting mechanisms and things like that. So one thing that happens in movements for justice, which is how I got into my little scenario that we can maybe discuss. There are cult of personalities. There are malignant narcissists. Sometimes malignant narcissists create cults of personality and those sorts of things. And so when you are engaging with difficult to process knowledge about the undue influence Native people have experienced, going and supporting a single individual in their fight and giving them power and money and things is not the way. That's how narcissists have been thriving in the movement space. And in fact, those cults of personality are how Russian, Iranian, Chinese influencers get in and then harm people. So support the tribes. You can go to native-land.ca, and some wonderful Native technologists have built a map that you put in your address. You can find out what tribe's territory you're on, what treaties exist in that place, what language group people are in. But the basic, I guess, message is to educate yourself on the very specific tribes people. So Steve, like when you introduced me, you're like, you didn't say Desiree is Native American. You're like, Desiree is Miwok. And that sort of understanding of individuals is very culturally competent, because there are 586 or so federally recognized tribes. And so there's like 1,000 on the continent, because federal recognition is not everything. So educating yourself, one, on just like the history of Native Americans, but then secondly, as you're looking at, oh my gosh, what can I do? A lot of it is to learn to observe in your own life first. So if you learned about, oh, they stole the children and they put them into language classes, what does that look like now upon Indigenous people around you? Maybe you want to take it to, okay, so these people use physical force to educate. Am I experiencing physical force or someone influencing me in my life? Because you can't really learn and be in strong allyship. They need to be where you do the internal learning and then it's applied through allyship. So my answer when I receive this question is first start with self. Learn how to control your own locus of control, where you have the freedom of your own mind to make your own decisions and actually practice critical discernment when you disagree with something and figure out why. Understanding your own biases and learning to just identify it. So the Native community is really good examples. But undue influence, fourth generation warfare, a lot of these things, cult, mind control, they come in so many different places that we need to strengthen our skills in first identifying them. Then we can be in strong allyship with other people.
Yeah, that's really so valuable. I just want to take a minute to define fourth generation or fifth generation warfare as a psychological warfare. I actually learned about it when I was researching the cult of Trump, and it's disorienting people to question leadership, legitimacy of institutions, science, even truth. They want people to be confused, and they want to engender conflict between similar people who of the same community against each other. And they're using a lot of AI, they're using mind personal data from people against themselves. And so in order to exist in 2021, if you're online, it becomes imperative to understand how this works and how to identify false, news, and not to reshare things just because it says something you like. But is that valid? Is there proof? Are reputable places, backing up this information or not? And you and I have talked about how the media has in its quest to get readership and more attention, they've sensationalized things and even amplified fake news, like really fake news, outright propaganda and lies, even by saying, oh, look at how crazy these lies are. They're still putting it out there on their channels and not understanding it's going to affect everybody who's listening to them. And so to really, I love that you said people need to take responsibility for their own minds first. Educate yourself first, know your values, and go slowly. And if something is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. And if it isn't, then you want to back off from it. And to have a learning posture rather than I know the truth with a capital T and this black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, authoritarian, simplistic frame that so many destructive cults use.
Mm-hmm. Fourth generation warfare also is where we are made into the weapons against ourselves. And it's a hands-off way to harm the public using algorithms, using artificial intelligence, all the mind, personal psychology data. So being mindful to not weaponize our own mentalities against one another goes back to that not creating a culture of disposability as we all learn, because I can guarantee we've all been problematic to somebody at some point. I have been very problematic to a bunch of people, but on my path to learning, I've apologized, handled it gracefully, and then not done it again. I mean, a lot of that.
Yeah, me too. I did a lot of harm when I was in the Moonies and since, even with the best of intentions. But if someone points it out, Steve, you forwarded something that isn't good or isn't true, I withdraw it and I apologize, and I want to keep a level of trust that people know that I'm a good person and that I'm trying my best to contribute and not to contribute to the mess that's happening right now. That's really valuable. Desiree, talk about also women and how terrible women have been treated, gaslighted, astroturfing. Could you just say a few things about that?
Yes, I could say many things. The ways in which women and non-binary members of society are repeatedly minimized through every possible control measure are known throughout history, and it's well beyond the glass dollhouses of white women. It's well into, pay structure, even like unpaid home labor that happens. There's a lot, emotional labor that women contribute, non-binary members contribute. All of that goes back to squelching anything that is not within the Christian heteropatriarchy. And unfortunately, that archetype has become synonymous with authoritarian control. So if you are outside of any of the boxes in any way, social control, physical control, verbal control, bite model, everything applies, right? So like, the pressures in which women are presented with is one thing, but then they take it one step further, and then you've got multi-level marketing scams which women and non-binary people fall into left and right, whether it be because they have more time at home, whether it be because they're in a toxic social group that is serving up some of these things. There's a lot of opportunities to prey upon the bodies, minds, and labor bases of women.
Yeah, if I may just add in at this moment, I was part of a 2-day global conference on multi-level marketing. And one of the things I learned from a researcher in Europe is that 77% of people involved with multi-level marketing are women. And I had not realized that the number was so very high. And these are, you're going to make $1 million in part-time work, whether it's selling soaps or something else, but you don't know up front really who they are, what it's all about, and you're told lies, but very confidently. And part of the programming is you just have to believe 100%, and it will magically come to you. The universe will deliver all this money that you want, and the universe is not interested in money. And God is not interested in money, even though the Moonies said, "Oh, God wants money." Go out and fundraise on the streets. No, I don't think so. That's not spiritual.
No, yeah, no. That's the way that I think as women or non-binary people, we can help actually defend ourselves against being weaponized against other people. So we have a whole big pastel QAnon base of women in QAnon that can aggressively come after people with fake news, and it's a whole thing. I mean, it's resulting in deaths from fake news, a conspiracy around COVID vaccines, and infertility, all of these. But if we understand our vulnerabilities, if we know where our cognitive windows are that people can look into and maybe even exploit because they can see in, and we all have curtains. And we would want to curtain our cognitive windows. That's the beautiful part of what makes our personalities.
Yeah.
We just need to know where those are so we can protect them, because our vulnerabilities are being exploited and weaponized. So when we talk about QAnon and colonization, forts need to be made and militias make forts. So if you were going to do a land grab, and this is where I have to be mindful not to spread fear, but also send up a flare that there's a problem. If you have a growing white supremacist militia base growing, and you have the same network of people growing off-grid, unarmed eco camps, and the militias are armed, where do you think militias go when they need forts and land? And then who do you think who's going to wind up in this dynamic here when someone comes with guns and wants your natives? We know this answer, and we know what will happen. And so a lot of it, at least personally as a Native person, being able to see that clear as day, is this is a land grab, a power grab, and it's an enforcement method. This QAnon / conspiracy minded push into politics and religious spaces. I'm just trying to let people know, like, maybe we should be watching out for this, because it's happened repeatedly 3 times on this continent so far.
Yeah, 100%. And there was a 60-minute story about how there are 19 million AR-15s privately owned in the United States. And nobody needs assault rifles to hunt deer or whatever. It's just ridiculous. And people like Alex Jones has been pushing Russia propaganda for decades, and trying to sell supplements for people to be survivalists when the Civil War happens. He's been pushing that narrative for decades, which is very, very upsetting and very concerning. I also wanted to mention a couple of things. You mentioned women being recruited into QAnon. I know there's a new book that just came out by a couple of scholars. Do you remember the title by any chance? I think it had to do with pastel. It had to do with the infiltration into the yoga movement and soccer moms and other things. But we'll put that link in the blog when we write it. And I also wanted to thank you, because we had a conversation about the whole issue of LGBTQ plus and you shared with me an article about Indigenous people's view of two sexes, five spirits. Could I ask you to just say a few sentences about that?
Oh, sure. Um, Non-binary people have existed throughout time and therefore are expressed within Indigenous communities through oral history, cultures. There's um, all kinds of things that reference the wonderful contributions of non-binary people. So some tribes believe in as many as five genders. Some folks maybe don't have a word for their gender in English. There are a number of non-binary genders that exist organically in the beautiful quilt of human existence. So within some tribes, two spirits name the babies. In some tribes, non-binary people are who teach you different forms of craft. There's very specific roles within society that are valued as just as equal, but call out the spirit of a two-spirit or multi-spirited person, right? So because someone looks at things from a multi-layered perspective in terms of gender, maybe no layers or maybe all the layers, it's a rainbow.
Right. It's not just two. That's what you mean by non binary. The authoritarians are like, nope, there's only two, and everything else is not okay.
Yeah, and so being understanding gender as again a continuum keeps us out of this black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, Christian enforced narratives of you have to either be a believer or not, you're male or female, or you are going to have to be killed, or all these other things. So there's a wonderful article, and what you're referencing is actually in Indian country today. It's called Two Genders, Five Spirits, and it's a historical overview of contributions and examples of two-spirit living people all throughout history since the time of photography.
Yeah, and we'll add a link to that article for people as well when we do the blog. I want to also note a historical moment that we're living in that the Secretary of the Interior of the United States, Deb Haaland, is Indigenous American.
Mhm.
And you've told me, how inspired you are by people like Deb Haaland, Cindy Blackstock in Canada. Share a little bit more about your feelings and inspiration.
Sure. Deb being Laguna Pueblo, she's bringing her full culture into a space that does not want her. So the work that Cindy Blackstock and Deb Holland are doing is looking at things from a network model. And that's extremely important because when you're addressing systemic issues, systemic racism, the legalese that uphold systemic racism, these powerful native entities understanding the system, being able to get in there and understand the tools available that no one else would have the eyes to look at because they're not native and they wouldn't look out for the native community. Like, it is truly a historic moment where across colonial borders, the native community is being led by native women who hold, the aunties, native aunties really take it to heart, just kind of as a personality, to watch out for those seven generations. The aunties, they've got all the projects, they're looking out for the water, the children, the food, the land, the everything. So having this moment where it's led by appropriate people to handle mass death, pain, um, people wanting to exploit that pain. It's a super complicated tribal dynamics around death and dying, and how to handle those who have passed away is so sensitive. We have to have appropriate handlers. And for the first time in history across borders, we have that. And this feminine centric leadership around a time full of pain is going to usher in my true belief, a moment of cross-cultural healing that we haven't been able to attain because we haven't had visibility until this moment.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And young leaders like you.
Oh,
Well, sorry, I couldn't resist, but I really, you're inspiring, and you're a journalist and photographer and activist and community organizer. So we'll continue being in touch with each other and doing what we can to help illuminate and guide people back to living together in community in a healthy way, and get out of this extremes of fear mongering and authoritarian control.
yeah.
So
Thank
as we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to say in this video? We'll do more, I'm sure, in the future.
Yeah, I think I could wrap up by saying two things. Your advice to continually remind someone when they are getting lost into something that you don't know where they're going, to just remind them of who they were before Trump, is perhaps the most salient and applicable and effective advice I've seen,
Hmm.
because it helps people access their previous self. I fell down a cult rabbit hole. My authentic self is what kept me from staying on the cult compound in Portugal and being lost, truly lost.
Mhm.
So reminding people of that root of who they are, that they like poetry and painting and growing plants, that's how you get your friends back. So I really encourage people. It sounds a little bit like Steve, self-promotional, whatever. It's good advice.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah, no, I criticize people who complain about true believers in QAnon, the cult of Trump. I criticize them, and I say, so you have family or friends who are believers? Oh, yeah. Do you talk with them regularly? No, I cut them off. I criticize them. Why would you cut them off? That will send them deeper into the indoctrination rabbit hole. Be respectful, be loving. Love is stronger than mind control. I always say that. And find common ground. And as you correctly said, if you can go get them back in time before they ever heard of Trump or QAnon, to what did they think and what did they value? And would they ever want to get into a relationship with a pathological liar, for example? Simple question. Oh, no. Would you ever want to go into business with a pathological? Oh, no, I'd never do that. Good to know. How on guard are you and alert for people who tell lies all the time? And you ask open-ended questions in a non-threatening, non-judgmental way, and wait and let it sink in and get a response and create a frame of we'll search for the truth together, rather than I know the truth, you don't, I'm going to fix you. That never works. But hey, we're humans. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody is growing and learning. Let's enter into a contract where you share something that was important to you, that got you interested in this point of view. Then we'll watch it together, discuss it, and then it'll be my turn to share something. We'll watch it together and discuss it till we figure out what is really substantial, what really is real. So, and it does work. It just takes effort.
It takes effort and it takes healthy boundaries to acknowledge if you don't have the capacity to do that at that time, that's also okay. But just don't run away and hide, because we need people, especially who have lighter skin like I do, to have those hard conversations, and just don't be afraid. Like being nice, the niceness of white moderates has been a very like documented thing where like sometimes inaction is just as hurtful as the action. So have good boundaries. You decide when you're able to have those conversations, because sometimes it can be very hurtful, but go in with kindness is always a good thing.
Yeah,
And then,
knowing your boundaries and saying, I care about you and I would love to have a deep conversation right now in my life. My resources are low, so I need to time out, but I'll come back to you and we'll make a time and we'll pick a place and we'll reconnect again. So it isn't just this black and white all or nothing thing.
right. And then I guess the other thing I would close with is just acknowledgement of the hard work a lot of people are putting in comes from a true place of care. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a whole movement like focused on, oh my gosh, what's happening? We need to pay attention to this. Because ultimately, what that is a show of compassion, and people are showing up in actionable ways to learn what's happening because they can witness it. So I just want to just acknowledge that there is, in this very hard moment, a lot of beauty to be found in the community that's answering these painful moments. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would be hopeless if I didn't know brilliant, talented, creative, passionate, compassionate, spiritual people that are embarked on this effort, such as yourself. And there's more work to do, so we will do it because it needs to be done. We can't wait for somebody else to do it. And I love your advice about look around your locale, learn about your local tribes and what is happening there. I think that's really that's one of my takeaways from this conversation. And there's a book by John Malloy, and I'm forgetting the title. Is a national tragedy? Is it about the Canadian residential school problem? Anyway, it's John Milloy because I just ordered it, but I'll put that in the notes as well. People can educate themselves further. Thank you, Desiree, so much.
Thanks, Steve. Always good to spend time with you.
Yeah, thank you.